Dr. A is conducting research to develop a new drug for the treatment of hepatitis B. Without obtaining informed consent for clinical trials, Dr. A recruited young children with IQs below 70 and deliberately infected them with the hepatitis B virus. 15 days later, he administered an experimental drug to observe its effects. Through this clinical trial, Dr. A successfully developed a treatment drug, referred to as Drug C. Although none of the children died from the infection, several suffered from severe complications as a result of being infected with the virus. Should Dr. A's research achievements be recognized? And if not, should the hepatitis B drug developed through this unethical study be used?
With the advancement of biomedical science and technology, human life expectancy has significantly increased. One of the most important driving forces behind these advances has been clinical trials on humans. A clinical trial refers to the process of administering a substance or device, which efficacy and safety have been demonstrated through animal experiments to humans. If a clinical trial proves that the new drug or medical device is safe and efficacious, regulatory authorities may grant approval for its clinical use in patients. However, since these drugs or devices have not yet been fully proven to be safe and efficacious, clinical trials must be conducted according to strict ethical and regulatory standards. Participants must be thoroughly informed not only of the potential benefits, but also of the possible risks and unexpected side effects. Continuous monitoring is required to identify any adverse events, and if serious side effects occur, the trial must be halted immediately, the cause identified, and the affected patients treated. In fact, in some cases, experimental drugs or devices have led to serious harm or even death of trial participants. Problem is that researchers conducting clinical trials often want to recruit as many participants as possible. But because the drugs or devices are not fully proven, it can be difficult to find volunteers. This can create a temptation for researchers to conceal risks, downplay uncertainties, or fail to obtain proper informed consent. In fact, some researchers have caused public outrage in the past for not obtaining consent or doing so improperly. This raises an ethical dilemma. If an unethical study leads to a breakthrough treatment that saves lives, should the researcher be praised or condemned? And even if the researcher is condemned, should the results of that unethical research still be used to save lives? Those who oppose the use of unethical research results argue that moral principles must not be compromised under any circumstances. If unethical research is rewarded simply because it leads to good outcomes, more researchers may be tempted to violate ethical standards. On the other hand, supporters argue that, if rejecting the results of unethical research leads to preventable deaths, then using those results may be the lesser of two evils and could increase overall human well-being. Another layer of complexity arises when defining what counts as unethical or illegal. Ethical standards evolve and often become stricter over time. For example, in the past, it was common practice to collect tissue samples during surgery for research without informing the patient. This contributed greatly to medical progress. Today, however, this would be considered a clear violation of medical ethics. Similarly, early anatomists in the UK and Scotland resorted to grave robbing or using the bodies of murder victims for research due to a shortage of cadavers. Edward Jenner, the father of vaccination, tested the smallpox vaccine on a gardener's son, without explaining the risks to him or his parents. He later received national honors for his discovery. If this happened today, Jenner might have faced imprisonment instead of praise. This shows that what was once acceptable may later be deemed unethical. If we were to evaluate all past research by today's ethical standards, much of it might not be usable. There is also debate over whether ethical standards should be universal or relative to context. For example, in South Korea, clinical trial participants typically receive a small stipend of about $50 to $100 for transportation and inconvenience. This is considered a modest benefit, but in developing countries, the same amount may be a powerful incentive. This is one reason why many multinational pharmaceutical companies conduct clinical trials in developing countries. Regulations tend to be less strict, legal accountability for harm is weaker, and costs are lower. However, in these regions, where healthcare infrastructure is poor and access to treatment is limited. Participation in a clinical trial may be the only hope for some patients. Even a small financial compensation may be highly meaningful for them. Given this, is it truly ethical to restrict clinical trials only to well-regulated, wealthy nations? Or should ethical standards be applied more contextually? Can unethical experiments be justified for the sake of medical advancement? Share your thoughts or opinions in the comments below.